I'm literally unwell. I'm shaking in delight. I'm having an out of body experience. Yeah. Oh my God, I love this podcast episode so much, and I think you'll really love it. We talked about all the juice. Like, we'll just get into it, you know? But we did talk about all the juice. A little recap. We talked about all the juice. We talked about living a really rich, turned on, pleasurable life. We talked about sacred sexuality because we talked about all the hot things. Like, it's just fucking juicy, and why I'm so obsessed with our guest Leola. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in a second, Leola Watkins. But why I love Leola so much and her work is, and I said this in the pod to her, is she walks the walk and talks the talk. Like, that is someone that really embodies the work and lives the work and is just a beautiful demonstration of how to live, laugh, love, and how to really rock it. So before we get into this fabulous episode, one of my favorites, to be honest, I want to tell you about the fabulous Leola. So Leola is a pleasure priestess and the best-selling author of Sacred Sex Ed, get the book, inspiring others to see an integration of sexuality and spirituality. We love it. She guides individuals and couples in discovering how life force energy moves in the body, and more importantly, how to harness this inner power for a pleasure-filled life that begins with our most intimate relationships and extends to our livelihood and our worldview. Like, God bless. I can go on and on about her work, her relationship to tantra and sexuality and the different modalities she teaches, but let's just get into the juice. I hope you love this episode. It's fabulous. I can't wait to hear takeaways. And if there's anything you want to share, anything you want to process, digest, highlight, definitely be sure to send me a message on Insta at WeTheLight_LLC. Had to think about what that was. Or shoot me an email, info@wethelight.org. Tell me what you loved. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you want to talk about and how you want to bring it into your life. Can't wait to hear. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome to the Weeder Life podcast. I'm your host, Erica Weederlight, and I am the CEO and founder of We the Light. I help humans who feel inadequate, broken, self-conscious, and shamed around their sexuality to reclaim their aliveness, their power, and to have a renewed relationship to pleasure while preparing themselves to feel hella confident to date others and themselves. AKA, I'm guiding people to live their #best lives. I have to give you a fair warning. I do unfortunately swear like a drunken sailor, so if you do have little ones by you, just be sure to pop in some earbuds. All right, friends, let's buckle up and let's rock it to this week's episode. Hi, I'm literally so fucking psyched that you're here.
I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited for everyone listening. Let's go.
Let's go. You have, first of all, from afar, like watching your journey online, it's just such an inspiration. And I don't want to get like too lost in the sauce in this question because I'm sure you answered this like a million times, but I feel it's important. Can you like briefly talk to us about like your journey and how you got here? Because it's beautiful. Like, again, from a outside perspective, how you're embodying the work is like so fucking gorgeous. And so I'm curious, like, what was your journey and how did that evolve?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it is an important piece, and I'm happy to share a bit about, how I got into this world and work and what's worked for me. And I'll also say, just like at the beginning of this conversation, it's a good moment to just acknowledge that I'm speaking from my experience and what I've seen work for me and other clients and people. And like, this is a opportunity for listeners to use their discernment and try on all the new ideas and thoughts and perspectives and ways of being, but you get to be your own guru at the end of the day. I'm
Love
just
that.
like a one perspective, one guide. So, how did I find myself here? I grew up in a small town in the Midwest in Missouri. And the place that I grew up in had a very traditional and conservative perspective of the world. It was also a lower income area as well. And so lots of scarcity and lack mindset additionally. And all of those things put together, and I don't want, where I grew up was also quite beautiful, like in the countryside. It was nice. There were lots of things from my upbringing and from where I grew up that I really appreciate. But I had what I would call an inherently traumatic sexual education, and also just like a limiting perspective ingrained in me into what I was capable of in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, I had, the media and all sorts of other influences that were perpetuating visions of body and like what that just like were really traumatizing. They were inherently
Yeah.
traumatizing. And so, yeah, very fear-based, very scarcity-based, shame-inducing, everything to do with my body and what it was capable of, including sexuality and intimacy. And so what that led to was this deep like shame in my body and trauma, but also this understanding like this can't be all of it. I
Right.
know that there's got to be something more for me, for this life, for my intimacy and sexuality. And so I went out and I explored it as much as I could while I was still in my parents' home until I was 18. I explored, especially sexually. And then when I left the house, I moved to Chicago and started my spiritual journey. But, in those early years of exploration, especially in regards to my sexuality and relationships and intimacy, I had no tools. I had
Right.
no tools. So I was going out blindly, trying new things, and honestly putting myself into some dangerous situations
Yeah.
and then adding to the trauma bucket. I like to say, though, that you don't need to have like a particular event that you can point out, especially in your
Mm.
sexual history, where you can say, that's my trauma. I
Yes.
truly believe that the way that we approach sexuality, intimacy, and relationships in our culture is, again, inherently traumatizing. And
Mm.
there's lots of shadow. So when I went out and explored, I didn't have the tools. I was confused and then kind of took on even more, ended up in many not consensual experiences. I experienced sexual assaults. And so all of this stuff was adding up. Then in my early 20s, I discovered yoga and meditation and spirituality. And that was great. Like I started to see some benefit from that, but it wasn't getting to the deeper pieces. It wasn't getting to the root. It wasn't getting to the energy that literally brought me into this world, which is
Yeah.
sexuality and intimacy. And around then, I met someone who knew some things about Tantra and shared what he knew. And that was kind of like the first seed being planted. And over the years, I started going to workshops and trainings and reading books and learning more. And very quickly learned that Tantra isn't just about sexuality, it's about so much more. It's about healing your inner child and taking radical responsibility and releasing judgment and taking on acceptance, but also attuning your discernment. And really, my whole life changed. And I stepped into this work professionally after studying myself for about 5 years. I started working with one-on-one with people, with couples, doing retreats. And then I recently wrote a book called Sacred Sex Ed, which I'm very happy to say has become a Amazon bestseller. And
Yes.
yes, this is the sex education that you probably didn't have, but that we all desperately need. It is a sex education that is empowering, honest, and pleasure-based, and is also about, more than just sex. It's also about learning to trust your intuition and claim your desires and have conscious communication in relationships. So, yeah, that's my
Oh, I'm
background.
obsessed. I'm obsessed. And I will. I'm like, I have 5 million things to say, 5 million things to ask, but I do have to frame this. And something that I really love in the beginning, and thank you first and foremost for sharing your story. I think it's so important, and I'm just really grateful that you're sharing it.
Yeah.
And something that I love that you said because it really made me emotional was how you like put the disclaimer of like, hey, like this is my path. And I feel like in this work, like I'll speak for my experience, I often felt like alone and isolated. If I didn't look like a teacher or if I didn't like if my path wasn't just like them. And so I just want to highlight that, like, thank you that it's like and the beauty that like we all get to have different like that's the fucking juice in this game. You know what I mean? Like thank God it's all different. So I just want to like thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it's not my job to tell you what your sexual liberation is going to look like or your intentional, intimate expansion is going to look like. My job is to have you aware that it's available and to give you all the tools and the menu to really see what's possible. And very often, the first layer of that is releasing the conditionings, the shame, the guilt that is keeping us from being in our, our truth,
Yeah.
releasing that shame. And then the second piece is expanding your awareness. And these are mirrored in the book. The first part of the book is about illuminating your shadows. And then the second part is about expanding your awareness. So seeing like, look, there's a whole menu available.
Yes.
Your sexual liberation could look like treating your body like the sacred exclusive temple, or it could look like exploring polyamory. There's no right,
Yes.
wrong, good or bad. It's really about what is most expansive and liberating to you and to you in this chapter. Because what
Yes.
works for me now is very different than what was healing and expansive for me 5 years ago.
Oh, I love that. I fucking talk about that all the time on the pod too, like seasons and cycles, right? And I'm sure you get this all the time with our clients. I have clients that grieve, hey, 5 years ago I was pussy popping down the street and now it looks like this. And I'm like, yeah, like that. It's the seasons and cycles. And so I'm really grateful that you brought that up. And I want to highlight this too. I remember, back in the day when I was starting this work and I was shadowing folks, people that have big followings and influential teachers. I remember, and I'm sure you've caught this too, people be like, what perfume are they wearing? Or what diet do they eat? Or what are they wearing? And I'm like, oh, so curious because there's a part like the human part of us is like, if I wear that perfume or if I eat their diet, I'm gonna have their orgasmic experience. And what you're teaching is so fabulous, right? It's like it's not about a copy and paste. It's so much about our truth and our, like you said, you give the tools for each person to live out their truth, which is just, I could just geek out on that. So I'm obsessed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
It's
totally.
so good. What part of the book or any part of your work, honestly, did you run towards? Like, what were you like, holy shit, I could write 30 chapters about this? Like, were there parts of it that you're like, yes, 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 yes?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that when I released the book, I wanted to rewrite it. Like I
Mm,
felt like, oh my God, there's so many new things that I want to add and make this so much bigger. And then at the same time, I couldn't imagine spending any more time on it. Like it
yeah.
was time to let go and let God and release the baby and into the wild. They say that when you write a book, it's kind of like you give birth and that baby turns 18 on the very same day because like you're pushing this incredible piece of work out into the world, but also it takes on a life of its own very quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to answer your question, all of the book kind of came through in a very channeled way and is very much a culmination of my what my life and my work has been thus far. But what felt the most juicy to write about, gosh, the whole thing was really juicy. I love writing about sex magic. That's something that's really
Yes.
close to me. The whole third part of the book is about liberating your arrows. So
Mm,
the first part of the book is like, hey, let's acknowledge that you probably have are holding on to some beliefs around your sexuality and intimacy that don't belong to you or are very shaded by a survival instinct or by your past trauma. Let's just acknowledge and heal that. The second part of the book, as I mentioned, is like, let's look at all these different templates to interact safely in this space and create mastery. Because that's a piece too that like a lot of people are really afraid to go near their sexuality
mm.
because it's such a powerful energy. And
Yeah.
we've been taught that so many powerful things are bad or wrong. Like money. Money's another one that's been made really taboo because money is neutral, but money can be channeled to create more joy and pleasure and equality in the world, or money can be channeled to create more dissonance and fear, and it can be used to fund wars and buy people, literally create slavery. So sexuality is very similar. It's a neutral energy. It can be used to create more connection and love and ecstasy, but sex can also be used to take from people and to hurt people. And so what I think is really important is to recognize that we don't create safety around these very powerful energies by shutting them down or pretending they don't exist or keeping them behind closed doors in the dark. We create safety by mastering these powerful energies. And so that's really what the second and especially the third part of the book is about. It's like, okay, now that you're liberated in your intimacy, your life force energy, your sexuality, how can you use it to make your world and the world overall a better place?
Oh, okay. We got to talk about this. Okay. So, because this is a question I love to ask everyone, and it's kind of sidebar, but connected to what we're talking about. I'm obsessed with talking about how people, I love to ask folks, like, how do you stay in your turn on? Because as we know, it's like, it's a discipline, it's a practice. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, holy shit. Like, it's a path of devotion. And
Yeah.
so I would love to hear about that road for you, like what that looked like and how do you stay, and sounds dramatic and corny, but like how do you quite literally fall to the altar of pleasure like time and time again? How do you keep, yeah, I'm like, yes, tell us everything.
Yeah, I think that it's a few things. So, as you mentioned, it really is a daily practice.
Yeah.
And it's a choice to see everything as sacred, which is one of the foundations of Tantra, is there is no good, bad, right, wrong. It's really about your intention and your own discernment to feel into what is for me in this chapter in service of my liberation and expansion. But there's really a lot of power in embracing what is there in the present moment, and especially the more challenging parts of life. Like it's easy to see the godliness and the pleasure in a flower blooming.
Mm.
It's not as easy to see God in, a pile of shit, just to like have two very clear examples, but you can see the genius that comes through in the reality of like the capabilities of our bodies and the excretory system, and like choosing to see the holistic picture is really powerful. Another thing that our society is really uncomfortable with is death. And
Mm.
it's like seeing that birth can't exist without death. Death can't exist without birth. Sex, like birth can't exist without sex. And seeing how it's all related is really powerful. And choosing when we have those moments that are particularly challenging. Let's use grief as an example. Grief is one of the most intense emotions, in my opinion. And it's also one of the greatest teachers when we're able to really surrender to it. But in those moments of intense grief, say, like maybe you lost someone or something that you love, it's like, oh, like I feel so deeply in this moment. And what a message to me that I am fully alive and I have loved so deeply that the loss is so painful because it's a measure of how much I loved, how willing I was to take the risk of being vulnerable, of being here, of making connection, of being alive in my body. And it takes like a real surrender to go into the grief, to fully allow yourself to alchemize it in that way. And then I'll just add one more piece, like a more practical piece of advice for staying in your turn on. As much as possible, I like to create the meditation of in every moment of how can I make this moment even more pleasurable.
Yeah.
So even before this call, I was like, okay, like I've had a few calls today. I'm kind of like getting my afternoon slump. How can I like make this moment more pleasurable? And I thought, okay, well, she mentioned we're not going to be on video, so I'm going to take it in my bed with my doggies and get my special drink. And it's like, like I feel so much more spacious. I have so much more capacity because I created the capacity for pleasure in my body. So doing something like imagine what would happen if you started every day asking yourself, how can I make today more pleasurable? Even just like those first moments in bed. Maybe it's not just getting out of bed, but it's like grounding, touching yourself, like, I'm alive, my body is here, okay, and taking that with you. Or maybe even like setting an alarm, like every 2 or 3 hours, you take a moment, the alarm goes off, and it's a reminder of, okay, how can I bring more pleasure into this moment?
Oh, my favorite. Okay, and let me ask you this because I'll speak for personal experience, but also for folks that are resistant to like I remember when I first started my journey, I was disgusted. Like, you know what I mean? Like my first, I was like, ew. You know, when people are like, I'm in my pleasure, I'm like, get away from me. Like, you know, like I had to work, of course, through my stories and of course, you know, being on this journey, I've been teaching this work for years and I still have moments where I'm like, "Oh, hello." Like, you know, you're back. So can you talk to us about like your like if you do hit pleasure resistance, what that looks like, how you hold it, how you move through it? Like I'm curious like if you could take us through the murk and the mud.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I do feel that most of that, the word used, pleasure resistance or
Yeah.
maybe judgment of others, is shadow work piece. It's definitely a shadow work
Yes.
piece. So it's important to recognize that many of us, when we started exploring our sexuality, we kind of were forced to do it behind closed doors and in the dark as quietly as possible and as quickly as possible, and then hiding the evidence so that you're not caught. Right.
Yes.
And so we don't realize that very often we're carrying this pattern into our adulthood, and we're also allowing it to shape how we view other people in their pleasure as well.
Yeah.
There's also a story that I was told that my being in my pleasure took away from other people's pleasure. Like it
Mhm.
was selfish or braggy to be happy and like loving life. When in reality, yeah, that's a choice that someone can make. Or they could choose to be inspired by you or use your expression as evidence. Like I've had that. I've had people show up on Instagram and they have all the things, and I'm like, oh, like how dare she have it? I don't have it. Who gave her the nerve to have that or to make that or create it or whatever? And maybe even make up stories about how they have it and I don't have it, and they must have had a leg up or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or I could decide to say, hey, like there's evidence for me, there's inspiration. So that's one piece. And then again, just being really mindful of, am I acting on a conditioning that's no longer serving me, especially around feeling like I need to hide this part of me
Yeah.
and others need to hide it too because it's bad and wrong.
Oh, that is amazing. Amazing. And how have you, I mean, I wonder if it's pleasure to pleasure, but like, how have you created more safety in your body for, like you said, like the, you know, judgment or if people like how, talk to me if you feel comfortable, like about creating like safety in your body for more and more pleasure as it expands.
Yeah, so a few pieces here. One, I would say just on shadow work in general is being more present with both my emotional reactions as well as my internal dialogue. So being comfortable with the slight changes that happen in the body when we feel a trigger or a threat,
Mm.
and being willing to get curious about, what is that voice saying? What is it coming from? Can I create space for the judgment and like welcome it and get and like have a conversation? Like, let's say, for example, I see like a woman and she's dancing erotically and sensually and she's wearing an epic outfit. And I'm like, I notice, because I'm in tune with my body, I've made a practice, I notice myself collapse a little bit. I
Mhm.
feel something inside of me contract. And so it's taking that moment to then go into the contraction and ask that contraction, what's going on? And it could be any number of things. It could be, why is she allowed to do that and I'm not allowed to do that? Or what a slut, and like being a slut is wrong and bad. And that's what I was taught. And then it's like having that conversation with that piece to get clear, and then deciding, okay, is that really mine or is that someone else's truth that
Love.
I've taken on? So to me, it's just like being really present with your internal landscape. And very often or it might be even be, I've had times where I connect with my internal self, and the voice is saying that it needs something.
Mm.
Like I need to feel like if I want to act in that way, then I need to have I need it to be celebrated by my partner. And then being able to make that request of your partner then creates the space to maybe share that more outwardly as well.
Oh, okay. There's so many good things here. I'm like, yes, yes. Like, okay, so it's like first and foremost, is slowing down enough and being conscious to recognize what's going on. And I
Mhm.
love what you said because I think often in our community, in our space, it's like the word desire, 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 desire. Like we're in the world, so but so often I have clients be like, "What the fuck? Like, what is a bridge to desire?" And I'm glad you started to speak about that. Of like, no, so can you talk about the bridge? I know you just started, so I'm like, wait, wait, wait. Um, about that for you, like how do you stay connected to your desires? How do you feel comfortable to ask for them? Desire talk. Tell us everything.
Yeah, this is such a big piece because I know for me, I used to be someone that always felt more curious about another person's desire and how can I
Yes.
fit into your desire? How can I fit into your fantasy? I was so disconnected from what I actually wanted. It was less vulnerable and therefore safer for me to fit into someone else's desire rather than for me to ask for what I wanted and then be in the position where I might be rejected or judged for my desire. On top of it, I feel that as women, we are conditioned very often to feel that our pleasure and our desire is for someone else, it's for a man
Yeah.
and not for us. And then we've also been very conditioned to be the peacemaker and to go along with the agenda and just be easy and not be so commanding. And so you have like several things that are working against you very often in this space. And so it's important to recognize that, like that's the shadow work piece there. And then to acknowledge that asking for what you desire is such a gift
Mm.
to the person that you're with. You're giving them a cheat code to make you happy. Like, how good does it feel? Like, if you think about it for yourself, like, how good does it feel when you make someone else feel good? You're like, oh, like I made them so happy. It's such a gift to give, right? And if you're not willing to claim your desires, then you're withholding the gift of giving from someone else, and that's really, a disservice as well. And I'll say that, rejection or judgment is an outcome that happens, but understanding that every rejection can be a redirection.
Mm.
And every rejection is also an opportunity to be grateful for the other person taking care of themselves. Because it can actually be a moment that builds trust. When you share a desire and someone's like, it's not really in my boundaries, or I don't really, not really into that so much. It's like, oh, like they're willing to be honest with me. And what a gift. Like I can trust their yes because they're willing to give me a no as well. So it's very much a framework, and knowing that just because someone's a no to your desire doesn't mean that you're bad or wrong. It just means that it's not in alignment and you don't need to make up a whole story about it.
Oh, I love that. And then can we roll back of like for you, like let's talk about like day-to-day desires. So as simple as like I desire to listen to this type of music today, or I desire ba ba ba. Can you talk us like through the everyday living of how you stay connected to your desires, like even the quote unquote small ones?
That's such a good question. I think that it really comes down again to moving slowly and
Yeah.
being in attunement with yourself.
Yeah.
And the more you're attuned with yourself, the more you can be in attunement with your environment. And attunement is also deeply connected to trust. So the more you're attuned with yourself, the more you can trust yourself and also then trust your desires. And to me, being in attunement with yourself means that you're aware of the subtle changes that your body makes as it's communicating to you.
Mm.
And the subtle changes can look like an emotion coming up. A subtle change can look like feeling like a little contraction or a collapse. The subtle changes can be feeling like that life force just stirring at the base of your spine and feeling like I'm not in a sexual setting, but like, ooh, I feel like a little turned on in this moment. And then getting curious about what's going on in my environment that's creating this subtle shift in my body. And then deciding based on what is going on, noticing those subtle changes are data, they're information for you to decide how to move forward. So let's say I feel that little turn on in my body and I notice like I'm really like reacting very well. Like it's like the sunlight. It's the sunlight that's shining through the window. That's what's giving me the turn on. Okay, like how can I revel in this moment even more or move my position so I can have more of the sunlight?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm scrolling on my phone and I suddenly feel this contraction. And instead of continuing to doom scroll, thinking about, ooh, what just happened? Was it someone's expression on social media? Was it some notification that popped up on my phone? And now I'm feeling obligated to go do something and I'm stressed out because I've got all these things going on. And okay, how can I use this contraction as a moment to say, okay, how can I bring myself back to center and then therefore be more available to receive the present moment and then therefore receive the pleasure that's available in this present moment. Does that make
Love.
sense?
It makes and you know what? I want to get to this. Why I'm obsessed with this work is it's so spiritual. You know what I mean? Like so many people, there's so many stories as we know and messaging that like this work isn't, sex isn't spiritual. It's like, what? Like everything we're doing is like in the present moment. And I want to highlight that, which we have been, but like a big highlighter, like this work is all about being in the present moment and like being conscious. And
So it,
yeah, like I'm curious for you if anyone's listening that struggles with that, like with slowing down or being present. Do you have any like tips or thoughts on like how people can slowly start to slow
yeah.
down and be present?
Yeah, one thing I want to acknowledge is that there's lots of opportunity for grace in this. So
Yeah.
giving yourself lots of grace because as a society, we are so rewarded for what we produce, what we do, what's output. And we're not so much rewarded for being and feeling. In fact, we're often rewarded for shutting down that part of ourselves and toughening up and pushing through and going to work anyways and like pretending like you're fine. Like that's rewarded more than being and feeling. And so the first piece is giving yourself a lot of grace because you've been conditioned very likely from a young age to not be in the present moment and to subject yourself to all of the distractions and the addictions that we have in this society that keep you from feeling the deeper pieces within you.
Yeah.
Like work is such a distraction. Our relationships even can be distractions, like getting caught in the drama and the gossip of relationships, getting stuck in the same patterns over and over again, rather than stopping, slowing down, and getting curious about why you keep getting in relationships with this type of person or whatever it is. So giving yourself grace. And then in terms of like practically slowing down, things that have really worked for me are having a morning practice that sets me up really beautifully and having like clear parameters, clear times where like this is a time for me to just be and do. Sorry, just be, not do. This is a time for me to just be and not do things like going to my yoga class, going for a walk outside in nature, laying and cuddling with my dogs and like leaving my phone in the other room. That's been really supportive to like time box and then have the times where, hey, I really do need to get some things done and let me give myself an hour to just fully focus. So
I
being
love.
really mindful of that structure has supported me a lot.
Yeah, and what's we won't spend too much time on this, but I'm like, oh my God, I could pick your brain on this. Is like, how have you created, besides like injecting pleasure, but like how have you added pleasure to your work? Like, how has that been? Yeah, I'm so interested about that journey, like the work journey and pleasure and how that all goes together for you.
That's a great question. So I kind of have this idea. I don't have the space right now to create this, but I want to create some kind of offering called the business of pleasure. Like business and pleasure, but it's business, like your business can be a pleasure. And this is another moment to really drop into the idea of attunement. So it can be very easy. So, I mean, I'm obviously a particular type of entrepreneur. I work in the online coaching space, so it's very different depending on what your job is and the level of like how much control you have in your work environment. I actually have a very high level of or a high amount of like I can change anything I want in my business at any time. Granted, it might mean like I've got to change contracts or or like renegotiate things, but I have that capacity. And I decided to take the entrepreneurial route because I wanted that, because that felt more expansive and liberating for me. For other people, what feels more expansive and liberating for them is to go into office or to have a boss where they know that they've got a like they know what they're going to make, they've got the security, and like that's awesome. I love that. That's really important. My husband has that kind of job. He knows that he's going to make a certain amount of money every year. He has health insurance. I get to benefit from the health insurance too, which is amazing. But I think that that's a thing too, is to decide like what values are most important to you as an individual. And to me, freedom is really important, and freedom to me means having freedom over time and how I work, etc. So that's a piece. But at every stage in my entrepreneurial journey, there's had to be a moment of calibration, of getting curious about what in my business is feeling really pleasurable for me, that I'm really, really enjoying and I want to lean into, and where is there resistance, and where is the resistance coming from? Is it coming from actually realizing that something that I was doing in my business, whether it be an offer or an employee, just was no longer in alignment? Or is it because actually like it's scary and I'm at a growth edge and I'm wanting to give up and stay in my safe bubble that I've created instead of pushing out of my comfort zone? So again, it comes back to that attunement and getting curious about where is the contraction coming from. Another thing that has been really, really supportive, I'll add just one more piece on this,
Yes.
is having a team. Queen has a team. One of my mentors says that all the time. Queen's got to have her team. So a tool that's worked really well for me is, have a piece of paper and split it into 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is things that you like to do that bring you pleasure and you're good at them.
Mm-hmm.
Quadrant 2 is I like to do it, but I'm not the best at it. Someone else could do this better. Quadrant 3 is I can do this, but I don't like to do it. And quadrant 4 is I don't like to do it and I'm not good at it. And so basically, when you start to build a team or get support, you want to do the things, you want to hire people to do the things in quadrant 4 first, the things that you don't like to do and that you're not good at. And then slowly move up till you get to a place where ideally you're mostly operating quadrant 1. I'm good at this and I like it. And I'll say that one of the first person I hired in my business was like a general marketing manager, like virtual assistant. But the second person I hired was actually someone to manage my home, to do my dishes, to do the laundry, to do my Amazon returns. Like I hate doing that stuff. And I think that that's one of the things that ironically as entrepreneurs, we resist hiring for some reason, because we think like, oh, the home's not the priority. I really need to prioritize my business. Or it's like they can't rationalize that expense. But that was game changing for me. I was like, oh my God, like
Yes.
work got so much easier and more fun when I had an environment that I was working in that felt tidy and organized and I wasn't having to do it. So
I love that. That is so good with the quadrants. And I love too, because it all comes back to what we were talking about before, that like to know ourselves, to like
yeah,
slow down enough to know what our truth is.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
so good. Oh my God. I have 5 million more questions, but I'll try to keep it. I'm like, you're just so, honestly, you're really such an inspiration of living and embodying this work. I want to briefly touch, and this is a whole topic, but like briefly touch upon, I know part of your work is like you said, your favorite thing is like the sex magic. So like merging priestess spirituality with sex. Like, can you talk about, again, such a general topic, but wherever you feel called, like, can you talk about that with us? Like that journey, like merging the spiritual, the sensual, the sexual, like, and whatever
Yeah.
feels appropriate today and what vibes today.
Yeah. So there's 2 pieces here that I feel inspired to go into. So the first piece is understanding that sexuality is the fabric of our existence. So every like both you and every single person listening is here because of sex.
Yeah.
Every animal is here because of sex. Every plant is here because of some sort of procreative interaction, right? Like everything that's alive is here because there was some sort of life force chemical reaction that happened. And even if, we were to look around the room in this moment, everything that you see very likely was either directly created by a procreative interaction or it was created by someone or something that was created by sex, right? So when you understand that, it's like, whoa, this energy is the fabric of our existence. It's so, so powerful. And also, this sexual piece is the bridge between the spiritual world and the physical world.
Mm.
And Tantra and shamanic sexuality, which are two of the lineages that I've worked under the most prolifically, have this understanding that there's a spiritual world, there's a physical world, and there's an energy that connects them that is sexual. It's life force. So that's that piece. I can go into a little bit more about sex magic if you'd like.
Please. I could jam on like the sexual, but yeah, let's go into that because I'm like, fuck yeah. I'd love to talk about sex magic. And especially I'd love to talk more about the bridge, like you said, the importance of this work. Because again, I think for a lot of us, I know I talked about this before, the story that we hold of it's dirty, bad, wrong. And so I'm so grateful that you're talking about like, wait, hold up. This is actually
Yeah.
holy shit. Yeah. So I'd love for you to take it away on sex magic and everything else you feel called to chat about with this.
Sweet. So with sex magic, I like to sum it up with the sentence, I will never underestimate the power of getting clear on my deepest desires and masturbating or having sex about it. So, sex magic is based on the law of attraction, which I feel like has become a more mainstream concept. But just to review, the law of attraction basically states that the more we revel in feelings of joy, pleasure, love, gratitude, those high vibration feelings and emotions, the more we will attract experiences, opportunities, and people that vibrate on that same playing field, right? And the inverse is also true. The more we revel in pain, anger, resentment, anxiety, any sort of lower vibration energy, the more we revel in it, and that's the important word, the more we revel in it, the more we will attract experiences, opportunities, people that vibrate at that frequency. Now, this isn't about not feeling those low vibe emotions. It's about, are you going to let that emotion overtake you and not alchemize it and come to the other side, and again use your emotions as teachers and get clear on what they're trying to tell you and then make a more aligned decision moving forward, right? So what does all this have to do with your sex life, right? So when do you feel the most in your pleasure, the most ecstatic and good and yummy and love in your body? For a lot of us, it is in those moments leading up to orgasm, in those intimate sexual moments. And so the idea of sex magic is to incorporate the law of attraction in those moments to capitalize on this procreative life force energy that's moving through you to anchor in more of what you desire. And in Tantra and in shamanic sexuality, many of the lineages believe that every sexual interaction is procreative. Obviously, you have the very obvious procreation where you're trying to make a baby, but even outside of those moments, even in self pleasure or oral sex, like those are also procreative moments, and you get to set an intention going into these moments of what you would like to quote unquote call in or magnetize. And with sex magic, what you want to do is you want to build that energy. You ideally want to edge rather than like, very often we go into a sexual situation and we're like, how quickly can I orgasm? How quickly can I get off? That's not what sex magic is about. Sex magic is about how much can you tease yourself, and as you're teasing yourself, edging yourself, you are making yourself an even stronger magnet for the things that you desire. And as you're getting into those places of high pleasure in your body, high stimulation, you're bringing in the five sense reality of what it would be like to receive the thing that you desire. So, for example, say I wanted to magnetize my dream partner. In those moments of pleasure, I would think about what it would be like for him to be holding me in that moment, how I want the relationship to feel for me, how I want to be protected or provided for or celebrated or whatever it is.
Upset. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, it's scrumptious. It's so good. So fucking good. Okay, I know we touched upon pleasure, of course, right? Like living a pleasurable life, living a turned on life, which we could jam about for years because it's just like, it's fucking baller.
Yeah.
I'd love to just like quickly sashay and just like go, if you feel comfortable, like your sexual, like, let's go into the sex part of like for you, how have you prioritized, not just like, oh, this is like a little, obviously this is your part of your life's work, but not just, like if anyone's listening, even if it's not their life's work, like how can they just take it off as like a tab in their life or like a little like how can they really have obviously we talked about more pleasure, but like how can they have a really rich sexual relationship? Like how can that be a really juicy, strong foundational piece of their life? Like I'm curious about your journey, about what you would suggest to folks.
First of all, I love the that you said sachet. I'd like to sachet over. I'm like, oh, I love what a creative use of language. That's a turn on. I'm gonna definitely be using that one. So sachet
Please.
to this topic. Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about how to prioritize pleasure, intimacy, sex, etc. So there's a few things that I have on this. One thing is to schedule it.
Yeah.
Schedule intimacy with yourself, schedule intimacy with your partners. I feel that there's a conditioning or a belief that we have that intimacy and sexuality needs to be spontaneous. And it's not fun, it's not good, it's not sexy if it's not spontaneous. However, putting being more intentional can actually create more space for spontaneity because there's actually
Yes.
there's more certainty and safety. So when something is a priority to you, you put it in your calendar. Like we put our work in our calendar, we put our doctor's appointments in the calendar, and those things happen because we put them into the calendar. So the one thing that you can do to maximize your potential of prioritizing intimacy is to actually just put it in the calendar, create the time and space for it. And in Tantra and in the lineages that I really identify with, it's not just about scheduling time with your partner, it's also scheduling time for yourself, for your own relationship to your intimacy and your sexuality. Another piece that I would recommend is taking the focus off of the orgasm, taking the focus off of the orgasm and noticing that there's actually such a wide variety. There's a huge menu, there's an incredible buffet of intimacy and sexuality, but we're kind of conditioned to do things the same way all the time. To like always do the same set of things that bring you to the orgasm. And then the orgasm happens and then the experience is over. And it's kind of like boring.
Yeah.
And so my suggestion is to take like even try taking orgasm off the table for a few interactions and just see what else is available, what else is there. And another thing that I'll say is the more you try to grab onto your pleasure of the orgasm, the more it can often evade you as well.
Mm.
And the less fulfilling the orgasm can be in that case. Let's see what else on prioritizing intimacy or pleasure. I'll just reiterate setting an intention and having intentional intimacy. And I'm happy to talk about
Please.
what that could be another conversation. Would you like for me to
I
go?
would love that. That would be fabulous.
Yeah. So intentional intimacy, what does this mean? So obviously you can very clearly set an intention for how you want to direct your life force. We kind of talked about that with sex magic. But again, intention is about being. How would you like to be or feel? And goals are about doing. What do you want to have done and make happen? And so when we're talking about intentions, again, it's about what kind of experience would you like to have in terms of what you want to feel and who you want to show up as and be in that experience. So before I stepped into this work professionally, I thought that there were two types of sex. I thought that there was good sex and bad sex. I thought that there were people that I have chemistry with and then people that I didn't have chemistry with. And lo and behold, looking back, most of my intimate interactions would be labeled as bad sex, in that my bar for good sex was very, very low. I wasn't asking for what I really wanted. I was fuzzy on my boundaries. And mostly, I just didn't even know what was possible. I had only like an inkling of the transformational and restorative possibilities of intimacy and sexuality. And therefore, I was leaving a lot of potential for emotional connection and healing and orgasmic bliss. I was leaving that all on the table. I just left my quality of sex up to chance. I left my quality of relationship and intimacy up to chance because I was going into it with zero intention. And I expected my partners to read my mind about what I liked. And as I got into this work more deeply, my perspective started to shift from leaving it up to chance and leaving it up to chemistry to imagine what could happen if I brought an intention. And I decided that every intimate experience got me closer to my higher self or God. And that's kind of the intention that I go into, and it manifests in different ways. But there's a school called ISTA that very clearly lays out the four types of intimacy, four types of sexuality, and how to have more intimacy that like feels intentional. And so we have reproductive intimacy, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the sex that you do to make babies. And to me, this is the type of sex that I find is the most widely accepted across cultures and across the world. Then you have recreational intimacy. Recreational intimacy is what it sounds like. It's the type of sex or intimacy that you do to feel good and to have fun. This is the type of intimacy that I find that we're most often seeking, but it's also very often, again, marked by the orgasm. Like it's all about like when you have sex as quickly and as quickly as possible, you get to the orgasm. And that kind of is the end of it. Nothing wrong with that, but there's more, right? And so then you have restorative. So restorative intimacy is the type of intimacy or sex in which you are using your life force to heal your body, mind, heart, or soul. The idea being that we are emotional beings and the body keeps the score, and we're very often bottling up stuff in our bodies, our emotions, we're not really fully expressing. And so when we have sex, we're awakening life force, and that life force has the capacity to clear and to help us release what's no longer serving us and to also emote and process. Like this is the type of intimacy where like at the end of it you're like crying and you might not even know why, but you're just like, oh, I feel so like or it's like makeup sex is also restorative as well. I even like to use restorative intimacy if I feel really stressed out or have a headache coming on. Very often in those instances people feel like I'm not in the mood for sex right now because I have a headache or I'm stressed out. But you can think of sex in this moment kind of like a deep tissue massage. You go in for a deep tissue massage and you have this, you know that it's not going to feel great at first, but you also know that if you can lean into that discomfort, there's going to be this release on the other side. And that's kind of what restorative sex can feel like, especially for me. Again, if I have a headache coming on or I feel stressed out, I'm going to lean into having sex 9 times out of 10 because I know that there's a capacity for it to actually be really healing for me.
Oh,
Yeah. And then the
gorgeous.
fourth type, just to wrap up, the fourth type of sex is transformational. Transformational sex is the type of sex that offers the divine experience of changing your life, changing the way you see the world, or the way you connect with others. And my experience that transformational sex can feel like a plant medicine journey. Transformational sex could be having a different type of orgasm, like a cosmic orgasm or a heartgasm for the very first time. It could even mean just trying something new with a partner, or even connecting with someone of the same gender for the very first time. Like all of those things can change how you see the world, how you see yourself. So those are the four types of intimacy. And once you have that menu, and I go into much greater detail of these in the book, Sacred Sex Ed, But once you have that menu available, you can say, "Oh, I really feel like today I could really use some restorative intimacy," for example.
Oh my God, that's so fucking good. That's so amazing. And I just feel like those pillars are just so like you said it that also helps with decondition a little bit of like, oh, it's not just sex, it's like, hey, this is actually restorative, hey, this could be transformational. Like there's
Yeah.
so much in here, and I have to highlight this because as you can tell, I'm obsessed with fucking living a pleasurable life, so I'm like, like I'm like, oh my God, I have to highlight this. But I love what you said in the beginning of, when we transitioned to this was, or we sashayed to this, was when you said of like, how did you phrase it? I want to butcher it, but you said something like, essentially, you gave yourself this gift of like really it wasn't just, oh, bibbity boppity boo, I'm having sex, like this is like it's life changing. And I want to
Yeah.
highlight that too, like for the pleasure work, we think, oh, we kind of have these stories like, is it worth it? Is it? But it quite literally can change our life. And I love that you said, like, the more that you're tapped into this, the closer you are to God, the closer you are to your higher self. It's like, I love that this is sexual. I love that this is pleasure. Like, if I'm real, I always say this, it's my example, like, I'm really enjoying my kombucha that I'm drinking, or I really am enjoying, the notes and the jazz music. Like that too can bring us closer to living the life that we always dreamed of. Like I feel like this is the work, and we talked about this a little bit of like the magic, like the spiritual part, like the magic, the witchiness. Like this is actually, let me ask you this really quick. Can you talk about that? Like, how is that like? Can you talk about like magic, like the witchy magic? Like, I'm like, I feel like you have some good shit to say about that, connected to pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'll say is that I feel like we don't realize how magical and powerful we are.
Yeah,
And I believe, and this is a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, we have been conditioned to look outside of ourselves for the answers from a very young age, to look at religion, to look at science, to look at the government, to look at our elders. And it's so rare in this world growing up to be taught to look within ourselves and to trust ourselves and to look at our intuition. And I'm not saying that the government or science or religion is wrong or bad. I think that they're important institutions, but I also feel like us being in our power can feel threatening to those institutions. And so a lot of those institutions have made, witches, women that are in their magic, out to be bad or wrong or dangerous, when in reality, they're just like healers.
mm.
They're women that are healing, they're midwives that are bringing souls into this plane. And so, yeah, there's so much power available. And to me, that starts with learning to trust yourself. And again, there is a whole chapter of the book about trusting yourself. It's chapter 5.
Oh, but so the Cliff Notes is, we're gonna talk about this. Everyone has to get the book. It's a must fucking read. It's a must read. It's needed. And before we go into where people get the book and more about you, where everyone can get your resources, is there any last thing? And this is such a broad question, but is there any last thing that you're like, wait, Erica, I must tell everyone this, or we didn't cover this? Like, is there anything else that you feel like I have to share this before we go? This is really important in regards to the sacred sex ed, or this is really important in regards to pleasures, or anything else that you feel you must share with us today?
I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good.
Good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. Okay, great. Because I was like, I could talk to you for 5 hours. I'm sad that this is not an all day podcast. This is fucking amazing. But before we wrap, I really would love to hear where people can find you, and again, in the podcast link for everyone, all of your information is going to be there. But can you share what we can get, where we can get all the goods?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called Sacred Sex Ed by Leola. You can find it on Amazon. If you do buy the book, you also have the opportunity to claim some fun free bonuses, including a month for free in my membership, which is called the Higher Love Club. And in the Higher Love Club, there's a vault of over 30 hours of additional content on tantra and relationships and prosperity and a bunch of other amazing things that aren't in the book and are very different but complementary. And then there's also a couple of live calls every month in the membership too, so then you can also get connected to some like-minded community. But you can find me on Instagram at Talk Tantra to Me. There's also a link to buy my book through my Instagram, Talk Tantra to Me. My website's talktantratome.com. You claim the bonuses for the book at talktantratome.com/book. But yeah, I'm based in Austin. I do retreats and events here as well. I also work with women in a program called Pleasure Priestess for women that are really feeling called to the tantrika path and feeling called to master this energy for themselves, for their beloved, and for the world. So, yeah.
Obsessed with you. And I know I said this like 10 times throughout the podcast, but you are someone that really walks the walk and talks the fucking talk. And it's a pleasure that we got to do this. I'm grateful, and I'm grateful for you being a leader in this really important work. So thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the listeners for opening yourself up to this taboo conversation and leaning in.
Yes. And as we know, like this work has changed our lives over and over. So it's a worthwhile cause.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
Me too. Thank you, love. What a gift this platform is to the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode and on this podcast journey. And if you loved what we talked about today and you know another human who could definitely benefit from what was discussed, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and share this podcast with them. Don't forget, hit subscribe or follow so you never ever miss an episode. And the great news is you can always follow me, my work, my blog, my podcast on my website at www.wethelight.org. And hey, remember, life is so much brighter when we shine. I'll see you next time.